If you were handed the keys to a time machine with one non-negotiable rule, you could travel anywhere but to one specific year. Which year would you forbid? The mind immediately conjures a rogues gallery of historical horrors. Perhaps you'd block out 1347, the year the Black Death began its devastating scythe swing across Europe. Or maybe 1942, a year plunged into the darkest abyss of the Second World War and the Holocaust. These are years synonymous with suffering, defined by famine, war, and disease on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. But what if I told you that, according to a growing consensus of historians and scientists, the single worst year to be alive was none of these? What if the most miserable 365-day stretch in recorded history was a year most of us have never even considered? According to Harvard medieval historian Michael McCormick, that grim distinction belongs to the year 536 AD. There was no world war. The most infamous plague was still a few years away. No, the terror of 536 began not with a bang, but with a strange, silent, and suffocating darkness. It started in the early months of the year, a mysterious and persistent fog that descended upon the Northern Hemisphere. This was no ordinary morning mist. It was a dense, dry, stratospheric veil that refused to burn off. For 18 agonizing months, this strange twilight clung to the skies over Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. The sun, when visible at all, was a pale bluish disk, robbed of its warmth and brilliance. It shone, wrote the Byzantine historian Procopius, without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year. The world was plunged into a dim, cold, perpetual dusk. This wasn't a plague, at least not yet. It wasn't the fallout from a human war. It was a global catastrophe of an unknown origin, a planetary event that choked the very source of life and light. What could possibly blot out the sun for a year and a half? And why do scholars now believe this single, dreadful year was not an isolated disaster, but the first domino to fall in what would become one of the most miserable decades in the entire history of human existence? The eerie dimming of the sun was just the beginning. As the strange fog lingered through spring and into a summer that never arrived, the consequences ascended from unsettling to catastrophic. The sky had, for all intents and purposes, fallen, and with it, the predictable rhythms of life on Earth. The most chilling part is that we don't have to imagine the terror. We can read it in the words of those who lived through it. Witnesses from across the known world, separated by thousands of miles and speaking different languages, unwittingly collaborated on a single, terrifying chronicle of global disaster. In Constantinople, the heart of the still mighty Eastern Roman Empire, the historian Procopius documented the pervading sense of doom. He wrote not only of the dim sun but of the constant fear it inspired, noting that war and pestilence and every other kind of deadly thing followed. It seemed to him that the world was signaling its own end. Further west in Italy, the Roman senator and scholar Cassiodorus penned letters that captured the surreal nature of daily life. "The sun," he wrote, "seems to have lost its wonted light and appears of a bluish color. We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon." He lamented a summer without heat, a spring without mildness. Grapes remained sour, wheat, harvested by shivering hands, was hardened by the cold, and the very seasons themselves seemed to have lost their way. The lament was echoed across continents. The Gaelic annals of Ireland record a simple but devastating fact: a failure of bread from the years 536, 539. 3 consecutive years where the staple of life could not be grown. Half a world away, chronicles from China noted a yellow dust that fell like snow and recorded snowfalls in the middle of summer, leading to widespread agricultural ruin and famine. Archaeological evidence from South America points to severe droughts hitting the Moche civilization in Peru during the same period, disrupting a society that had flourished for centuries. It was a planetary crisis. The immediate mechanism was simple and brutal. Modern analysis suggests that the atmospheric veil caused average summer temperatures in Europe to plummet by as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius, 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit, triggering the coldest decade in over 300 years. For agrarian societies utterly dependent on predictable weather, this was a death sentence. Crops failed on a massive scale. The engine of civilization agriculture had seized. The result was a famine of unimaginable scope and severity, leading to starvation, social unrest, and the desperate migration of entire communities. This was not merely a year of bad weather, it was the onset of a systemic, prolonged collapse. For centuries, the question lingered, a ghost in the historical record. What had done this? What terrestrial or celestial power could be so great as to steal the sun from the sky? The answer would lie hidden, frozen in time, waiting for a new kind of science to unlock its secrets. For over a millennium, the cause of the 536 event remained a profound mystery, a historical ghost story without a culprit. Was it a comet, as some speculated? A divine punishment? The explanation, when it finally came, arrived not from a dusty archive of ancient texts, but from the pristine frozen landscapes of the Arctic. The key lay deep within the ice sheets of Greenland and the glaciers of the Swiss Alps, which act as extraordinary time capsules. Each year, snowfall traps layers of atmospheric particles, dust, ash, pollen, and chemical traces, creating a vertical library of Earth's climate history. By drilling deep into this ice and analyzing the layers, scientists can read the planet's past with astonishing precision. The breakthrough came from a team led by historian Michael McCormick and glaciologist Paul Majewski at the Climate Change Institute of the University of Maine. In 2018, using an ultra-high-resolution laser method to analyze a core drilled from the Colle Nefeti Glacier in Switzerland, they found the smoking gun. In the layer of ice corresponding precisely to the spring of the year 536, they discovered a microscopic layer of volcanic glass, or tephra. Chemical analysis of these tiny shards pointed to a single, cataclysmic volcanic eruption. The chemical signature of the rock matched that of volcanoes in Iceland. Suddenly, the historical accounts clicked into place with scientific evidence. A massive volcano, likely in Iceland, had erupted with almost unimaginable force. It didn't just spew lava and ash onto the surrounding landscape, it blasted a colossal plume of sulfur, bismuth, and other fine particles straight up into the stratosphere, the upper layer of the atmosphere. Once there, these particles didn't just fall back down. Instead, the sulfurous gases reacted with water vapor to form a dense aerosol cloud, a vast, reflective blanket that spread across the Northern Hemisphere. This stratospheric veil acted like a planetary sunshade, scattering and reflecting incoming sunlight back into space before it could warm the surface below. This phenomenon, now known as a volcanic winter, was the direct cause of the dimming sun, the plummeting temperatures, and the failed harvests described by Procopius and Cassiodorus. The mystery of the fog was solved, and the ice core told an even darker story. Just as the world might have begun a slow recovery, the data showed another major eruption in 540 and a third in 547. It wasn't one event. It was a brutal 1-2-3 punch from the planet itself, locking humanity into a decade-long cold snap. The eruption of 536 didn't just cause a bad year, it threw a switch, plunging the world into a new and terrifying climatic state that would set the stage for an even greater horror to come. The volcanic winter of 536 was a catastrophe in its own right, a disaster that brought famine and social collapse to vast swaths of the globe. But its true legacy, the reason it cements 536 as the worst year to be alive, is that it didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the perfect setup for a second, even more devastating blow. The decade of cold, hunger, and darkness created the ideal conditions for one of history's most feared killers to emerge from the shadows and embark on a reign of terror. In 541 AD, just 5 years after the skies went dark, the first great pandemic of bubonic plague, the Plague of Justinian, erupted in the Roman port of Pelusium in Egypt. It's crucial to understand that the volcano did not create the plague. The bacterium responsible, Yersinia pestis, had existed for millennia, living in a relatively stable cycle among rodent populations. What the volcanic winter did was create the perfect storm convergence of factors that allowed the disease to escape its natural confines and tear through human civilization with unprecedented virulence. The connection is a grim but logical chain of events. First, and most importantly, was widespread malnutrition. The crop failures of 536 and the subsequent cold years left millions of people in a state of chronic hunger. Their bodies were weak, their immune systems compromised. A population that is starving is a population that is exquisitely vulnerable to infection. An illness that might have been survivable for a healthy person became a death sentence for someone whose body was already fighting for basic sustenance. Second, The climate-driven chaos shattered social structures and spurred mass migrations. As people fled famine-stricken countrysides in search of food in the cities, or as entire communities moved in search of more fertile land, they created a perfect transmission network. The plague travels via fleas on rats, and rats travel with humans especially along crowded trade routes and on the grain ships that were now more critical than ever. The Eastern Roman Empire, under the Emperor Justinian, was a highly connected and urbanized society. Its magnificent trade routes, which were once a symbol of its power and sophistication, now became superhighways for disease, carrying infected rats and fleas from the grain ports of Egypt to the heart of the empire in Constantinople and beyond. The arrival of the plague in 541 on a population already weakened and dislocated by a decade of volcanic winter was an apocalypse. It swept through the Byzantine Empire, killing, by some estimates, up to 10 people a day in Constantinople at its peak. It is believed to have wiped out between a third and a half of the population of the Eastern Roman Empire, fundamentally derailing Justinian's ambitions to restore the empire to its former glory. It was the confluence of these two distinct, yet interconnected, disastrous climatic catastrophe, followed by a biological one, that created a decade of almost unimaginable misery, a period of darkness from which the world would not fully recover for a century. The year 536 was the first note in a long and terrible symphony of death. In the final analysis, the designation of 536 as the worst year to be human isn't about a single dramatic moment of suffering, it's about its role as a catalyst. It was the year the world's life support system was switched off, triggering a cascade of failures that would culminate in a decade of unprecedented despair. The eerie twilight of that year was the quiet prelude to the screams of famine and the silence of plague-ridden cities that followed. It stands as a chilling testament to the profound fragility of human civilization, a reminder that even the most powerful empires, with their grand armies and sophisticated economies, are ultimately at the mercy of the planet's elemental forces. A single geological event, happening in a remote corner of Iceland, was enough to destabilize societies across an entire hemisphere. The story of 536 and the dark decade it spawned resonates with a particular urgency today. It forces us to look beyond our immediate concerns and confront a difficult truth. Our complex, interconnected global civilization is, in many ways, just as vulnerable as the Roman world was. We may have advanced technology, instant communication, and sophisticated scientific knowledge, but our reliance on stable climate patterns and global supply chains is absolute. The tale of that ancient volcanic winter serves as a powerful historical parallel for our own modern challenges. It invites us to ask unsettling questions. What would be the modern equivalent of the 536 eruption? Could it be a supervolcano, like the one slumbering beneath Yellowstone, whose eruption would dwarf the Icelandic event? Could it be a major asteroid impact, an event we know is a statistical certainty over long timescales? Or, perhaps, most uncomfortably, could the volcanic winter of our era be one of our own making? As we pump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, destabilizing the very climate systems we depend on, we are, in a sense, gambling with the same forces that brought the ancient world to its knees. The story of 536 is not just a piece of historical trivia, it is a warning etched in ice and chronicled in the annals of human suffering. Yet, amid the darkness, there is a glimmer of a different kind of lesson. Humanity survived. It was battered, diminished, and set back for generations, but it endured. Cultures adapted, empires eventually regrouped, and life, slowly and painfully, found a way forward. The human capacity for resilience in the face of overwhelming disaster is perhaps the most enduring story of all. By studying this bleakest of years, we don't just learn about our vulnerabilities, we are also reminded of our strength. Understanding the past, in all its horror and hope, is the only way we can arm ourselves with the wisdom and foresight needed to navigate the inevitable challenges of the future. The whispers from the year 536 are faint, but they carry a message we cannot afford to ignore.